I'm Hanan Challouki. I'm the founder of Inclusified and an inclusive strategist. I basically work on helping organizations and companies reach a more diverse audience. Well, I've been working on this topic for the past 7-8 years now, and I've learned a lot along the way. So when I just started out, it was quite difficult for me to grasp certain things, and to put a vision into a strategy could be quite complex. And it was for me really nice to put all that information and everything that I've learned in the past years together and make it a lot more clear for other people what it means to be inclusive, to communicate in a more inclusive manner. Because I didn't feel like there was a very nice source when it comes to this topic, and definitely not a practical one. So a lot of the things in the book are based on cases, on work that I've done, work of colleagues of mine, and it makes it a very handy tool to have, the book. That's what I believe, at least. All the time and by everyone, basically. It is such an essential skill to have. It doesn't really matter if you work on communication or if you are in a management position or if you work at a reception desk. It really doesn't matter, because everybody is always going to be confronted with the super diversity that we are experiencing today. It doesn't really matter in which society, because you're always going to be confronted with a lot of different people, and it's very important to know how to communicate with different groups of people and how to do it in an inclusive manner. Specifically, if you work on communications, or if you are the head of a company that launches a lot of campaigns and that is constantly communicating both externally and internally, then it becomes a necessary skill to have, to know how to communicate, how to reach as many people as possible without excluding certain groups, certain target groups that are important to your vision or to your strategy. So it is important to everybody, but of course, if you work in communications or marketing, internal communications, if you do something when it comes to employer branding, for example, then it is extra important to know how to use it. So super diversity is something that is relatively new. We've always known diversity, of course. People are different. People have different backgrounds, personalities, and so on. But when it comes to super diversity, we're mostly referring to two global streams. One, which is the digitization of society. Everything is becoming a lot more digital. We get connected and we associate ourselves with online identities and online realities and so on. But it's also easier for us to communicate with people that live abroad, family members, and so on. So the online component makes us all a lot more globalized. That is the first stream that is important. And the other one is, of course, streams of migration. Whether it was 50, 60 years ago when people came here to work, or people today that flee here because of a war, or any other reasons, we are confronted with so many different ethnicities, and those groups in itself are no homogeneous groups. That means if we were talking about the first stream of Moroccan migrants who came here from Morocco, who came here to Belgium in the 60s and 70s, we would say, well, that is that group, Moroccan Belgians. They are migrants who come here to work, and we expect them to go back, for example, after a couple of years, which never happened. But that was very easy, and a group that is very easy to identify and to say, they all lead quite similar lives, and it's very easy to identify that group. Today, when you look at Moroccan Belgians, for example, there is a lot more diversity within the diversity. You still have that first generation Moroccan migrant, but you also have second, third generation people that might have never even seen Morocco, children that grew up here, that were born here. So the fact that within those ethnic minorities, there's so much more diversity, and you have those online realities, which also add a lot of layers to your identity, this causes what we call today super diversity. This is, by the way, not something that I've made up. There's been done a lot of research about this term, and it's quite an interesting topic, actually. Everything starts with having more diverse insights. I believe we often communicate without really knowing that much about a target group or different groups in our society. We assume a lot of things. We assume, well, these Moroccans, why don't we communicate in Arabic and then they will understand? Well, the majority of the group is MVSLIM, doesn't even speak Arabic, for example, or they speak Dutch and French, like a lot of other Belgians. So we assume a lot of things and we create our communication based on assumptions that aren't necessarily right. So the first thing you need is diverse insights. You need to know who your audience really is, where you can reach them, what are things that are important to them, what are things that you can have in your communication that they're going to look at it and think, that's really not for me. So it's not just about having diverse insights, but also knowing how to translate them into a strategy. And not just imaging. I know that a lot of companies or brands think, we're just going to put some color in a poster and going to be fine. They will get it that it's also for them. But it's so much more than that. And simply adding color to a certain picture doesn't necessarily make it inclusive. So you need diverse insights and you need to know how to translate those insights into a clear, inclusive strategy. No, it's an end story. So you need both. You need diverse imaging, but diverse imaging alone is not going to do it. If let's say an organization and they are a really white organization or they are an extreme right organization, for example, well, it doesn't really matter how diverse their poster is. People know this organization and know this is definitely not for me because I know the brand, I know the company, I know the organization, and it doesn't speak to a lot of diverse groups of people. So a lot of things also have to do with the reputation that you have, the image that you have as a brand, as a name within society. But adding color is never enough, and it's not always the right fit. So that's also important to know, that you have to communicate in the right context as well. If you take an image from a village somewhere in Belgium where there are only 20 people living there and there are all white people that are over 75, it's going to be really weird if you communicate about the village and put in a lot of diversity, which isn't the reality. So it has to match the context of what it is that you're trying to communicate. So I founded MVSLIM in 2015. I was only 22 years old. And I had this idea, this vision of, we need to tell other stories, because right now the way that the news coverage and everything that when it comes to Muslim minorities is quite negative. This was in 2015. A lot was happening, a lot of current events that weren't exactly positive. And I felt like, okay, we need to tell another narrative. We need to tell other sides to the story, because this is so important to have these positive images, especially for young people growing up with that Muslim identity, but living in the West. They need something that they can look up to. They need people they can look up to. So that's how MVSLIM was created. It's not mine anymore, by the way. It was sold a couple of years ago. But that was basically the idea. Let's create a media platform that can bring a new narrative and that can bring stories that might have been either untold or unheard by many. When it comes to my podcast, Wat Zij Wil, it was the same idea that was behind it, which was when I started my entrepreneurial journey, I was 22. I did not know any other entrepreneurs, especially not any diverse entrepreneurs. And it was quite difficult for me to find inspiration or to find advice anywhere, really. So I had to figure out a lot of things. And as an entrepreneur, of course, you're going to make mistakes, but I think I made a lot more because of the lack of a certain network. And when Corona hit the world during the first lockdown in Belgium, I decided to create a podcast to tell these stories of many different women, their businesses, their career stories, what they've learned, the mistakes that they've made, which advice they would share with others, to bring this network that I had built in all those years, to bring that network closer to a lot of people that I know that still might not have those resources or that network, that they have an idea, they want to do something, but they have no idea if they should and how they could get started and which mistakes they should try to avoid and which mistakes are definitely okay to make. So it was always the same idea was behind it, the idea of let's share stories that we don't often see. Because when it comes to female entrepreneurs, there are many of them, but their visibility is a lot lower than with a lot of male entrepreneurs. So it was important for me to share those stories as well. Well, because I of course, I fit into both of those identity boxes. And it's personally important to me because there were things that I was missing. And, when I was growing up here in Belgium, I was missing those positive stories on Muslim identities. And I was missing those women entrepreneurs. And I basically created something that my 15-year-old self or my 22-year-old self would have really appreciated back then. And I know that there is still a very diverse generation here in Belgium that is crazy talented and ambitious and needs that inspiration and has a right to that inspiration. And I really wanted to provide something for them. When it comes to the word role models, there are always like two sides of the coin. I think it's really important to have them. I think everybody needs somebody to look up to, whether that is a religious figure or somebody in society or somebody in business. It is important to have examples in your life, and I think that's essential. We all need them. But also, being a role model or having a role model can have another effect as well. It can be used against you as a person of a minority. For example, people could say, well, if they could do it, how come you couldn't do it? Or if they can be a very successful entrepreneur and have a migration background, why is it something that you cannot do? And I think it's dangerous because, of course, we still have a lot of social inequalities and not everybody starts at the same level, and we have to acknowledge that. So that's something that I just want to share to add some nuance to the story. But of course, I do find it important to share these positive stories because they exist, they are very real, and these are just stories that we often do not hear. If people think about entrepreneurs, they often think about white men in suits. And of course, they are there, but that group is so diverse. And if you walk around in Antwerp, like half of the businesses, and you just walk inside a restaurant or a cafe or a clothing store, a lot of them are owned by people with migration backgrounds. So to have a role model is essential because, there's this quote that everybody knows, if you can't be what you can't see. I truly believe that. And I think that you can limit your own possibilities if you have never seen anybody in a certain role. And last year, I followed this session by a Black academic person in the Netherlands, and she was sharing some stories, and she said, well, it took me 34 years. So I was 34 years old when I first saw an academic person that looked like me. And she had to go from the Netherlands to the United States, and where she attended a class at a university, and that's where she first saw a Black female professor, which was crazy to her. So having role models is in fact a privilege. Having people that look like you in a lot of different positions, doing positive things that inspire you, and you can say, wow, she looks like me, and I could be that one day. That is a privilege. And I try to take away that, the limits there simply by showing other people like there are other stories as well, and they deserve attention, and we should know these stories. And I think it's important to make role models more visible. Yes, I have so many people. I often share posts on LinkedIn from those people. So because I know that I'm going to forget some names and I don't want to take away certain acknowledgement. But some people in the field of inclusion that I really like to follow are Zineb Berg. She's doing great work when it comes to inclusive communication and building strategies for brands. Sana Salami, the same. She also has some great insights when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So those are two Belgian women that you should definitely follow. There are a lot of other people as well, of course, a lot of people abroad. But I don't want to mention any names because I'm pretty sure I'm going to forget a lot of them. But I often share things from them. And I think that if you want to follow people that work in inclusion, it's also important to stay up to date, because a lot of people enter the field constantly. But there are definitely some great sources out there. Get over it. There's really not much I can say, because I know that this is it's a reality. A lot of people don't work on inclusion because they are scared of making mistakes, doing something wrong. And it's a pity, really, because it makes you, it puts you in a position where you can't move anymore. You're going to get stuck, and everybody else is moving and taking steps when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So basically, you're putting yourself behind. And the only way to do it is just, you have to get over that fear, and you have to be innovative enough and open enough to experiment and to discover perhaps why you have this fear, but also why you haven't done anything when it comes to inclusion before. And so I truly believe that it's a missed opportunity to not think about it or to not work on it. Fear is definitely a reason why people get stuck, and they really shouldn't. Don't listen too much to other people, which might be a bit tricky. Everybody always has great advice. Most of the time, people that have never done anything by themselves before. But try to listen to your own gut feeling. I think when I look back, I think I've often not done that because of other people's opinions, and maybe you shouldn't do this because that's dangerous, or that might not work, and often you have quite a good intuition of what works and what doesn't work. So I usually, when people tell me I have an idea but I'm not sure if I should do something with it, I get those messages all the time. I usually say, just do it, just make it happen, just give it a try. Nothing is irreversible. So even if you start a business and it doesn't work out, well, I hope you didn't put all your savings in it, of course, but most of the time it isn't irreversible, and you can learn from whatever went wrong and you can try again. But if something is like burning inside of you, you have this idea, you really want to do something with it, it would be a pity to not do it. And the regrets and the idea of, I wish I would have done that, is going to be such a painful feeling. So to avoid that, you really have to just take those steps.